Jake Morrison sat in his captain's chair, staring at the display screen in front of him. The coffee in his cup had gone cold hours ago, but he didn't notice. Something was bothering him about the signal they had picked up 3 days earlier. The UES Voyager was one of Earth's newest exploration ships. For the past 6 months, they had been mapping star systems on the outer edge of human space. It was usually boring work. Most of the time, they found empty worlds or primitive life forms that barely knew how to make fire. But this signal was different. It wasn't random noise from space or the usual radio waves that dead stars sometimes made. This was math. Pure, complex math that seemed to be trying to tell them something important. "Captain," said Lieutenant Amy Carter from her science station, "I've been working on that signal all night. I think it's some kind of message." Jake turned his chair toward her. Amy was young but smart. She had joined the crew straight from the Space Academy, and her job was to study anything strange they found out here. "What kind of message?" Jake asked. Amy's fingers moved across her control panel, and the main screen changed to show rows of numbers and symbols. "It's mathematical, but not like any math we use on Earth. Whoever sent this is way more advanced than us. The signal keeps repeating the same pattern over and over again." "Maybe it's just a computer malfunction," suggested Lieutenant Tom Davis from the navigation station. "Some old space probe that's been floating around for years." Amy shook her head. "No, this is too complex for that. And look at this part." She pointed to a section of the display. "These numbers match up with the location of nearby stars. I think someone is asking for help." Jake felt a chill run down his back. In 300 years of space travel, humans had met dozens of alien species, but most of them were still living in caves or had just learned to build simple machines. They had never found anyone who was more advanced than Earth's technology. "How far away is the signal coming from?" Jake asked. "About 2 days' travel at maximum speed," Tom answered. "It's coming from a star system we haven't mapped yet." Jake made his decision quickly. "Set course for the signal source. Maximum speed." The Voyager's engines hummed louder as the ship accelerated through space. Jake sent a message back to Earth. Command, telling them about the signal and their new destination. He knew they wouldn't get a reply for weeks. They were too far from home. 2 days later, they dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of an unknown star system. What they saw made everyone on the bridge go silent. The space around them was full of wreckage. Huge pieces of metal and strange materials floated everywhere. Some of the debris was bigger than Earth's largest cities. The designs were unlike anything humans had ever built. Curved walls covered in symbols, weapons that looked like works of art, and power cores that still glowed with energy after who knows how many years. "My God," whispered Amy. This was a battle. The biggest battle I've ever seen. Jake stared at the destruction around them. "How long ago do you think this happened?" Amy checked her instruments. "Based on the radiation levels and the way the debris has spread out, I'd say this battle was fought thousands of years ago, maybe tens of thousands." In the center of the wreckage field, their sensors found something that was still giving off power. It was a ship, but barely. Most of it was destroyed, but a small section near what might have been the bridge was still intact. "Captain," said Tom, "I'm picking up life signs from that ship. Whatever's over there, it's still alive." Jake called for his security chief, Lieutenant Lisa Brooks. Lisa was tough and smart, the kind of person you wanted with you when walking into unknown danger. Together, they took a small shuttle over to the alien vessel. The airlock was damaged, but their engineers managed to cut through the metal. Inside, the ship was dark except for a few emergency lights that cast strange shadows on the walls. The air was thin but breathable. They found the alien in what looked like a command center. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. The being was made of what looked like living crystal, about 8 feet tall with dozens of thin arms that ended in delicate hands. Its body gave off a soft blue light, but the light was getting weaker. When it saw them, the alien made a sound, like music mixed with breaking glass. Jake and Lisa couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. The alien was dying, and it was trying to tell them something important. Amy's voice came through their radio communicators. "Captain, I'm reading the creature's brain patterns from here. It's incredibly intelligent. Its mind is working on levels we can barely measure." Jake knelt down next to the alien. "We want to help you. Can you understand us?" The alien's crystalline body flickered with different colors. Slowly, patterns of light began to move across its surface. After several minutes, the lights formed shapes that Jake recognized as numbers and simple pictures. The alien was learning their language by watching their brain patterns. It was learning faster than any computer Jake had ever seen. Finally, the alien spoke in broken English. "You are new, young species. How did you find this place?" "We followed your signal," Jake said. "The mathematical message you sent out." The alien's lights pulsed brighter for a moment. "Good. Had to try everything. War has lasted so long. So very long." "What war?" Lisa asked. The alien, who told them its name was something that sounded like HFY, began to explain. The story it told was almost impossible to believe. For 800,000 years, two massive groups of alien species had been fighting across the galaxy. On one side was the Kithera coalition, which included HFY's people and thousands of other species. They believed that different kinds of life should be free to live as they chose. On the other side was something called the hegemony of Vornash. They wanted to control every living thing in the galaxy and make them all think and act the same way. The war had been going on for so long that entire civilizations had been born, lived, and died during the fighting. Billions of species had been wiped out completely. Whole sections of the galaxy had been turned into lifeless zones where nothing could survive. "Both sides have weapons you cannot imagine," HFY said, its voice getting weaker. "We can destroy stars, move planets, even bend time itself. But we are evenly matched. Neither side can win." Jake felt overwhelmed. Humans had been proud of their space technology. But compared to these ancient civilizations, Earth was like a single ant trying to understand an elephant. "Why are you telling us this?" Jake asked. HFY's lights flickered one last time. "Because sometimes the smallest change can break the greatest stalemate. Your species is young, unpredictable. Maybe you can do what we cannot." The alien died before it could say anything more. Jake and Lisa sat in the dark alien ship, surrounded by the evidence of a war bigger than anything humans had ever imagined. When they returned to the Voyager, Jake called a meeting of all his senior officers. He told them everything HFY had explained. The room was quiet for a long time after he finished. "Sir," said Tom finally, "what are we going to do?" Jake looked around the table at his crew. They were good people, but they were just one small ship with basic weapons and simple technology. How could they possibly make a difference in a war that had been going on since before humans had even learned to farm? But something inside Jake refused to give up. Maybe it was human stubbornness, or maybe it was the way HFY had looked at them with hope in its dying moments. "We're going to try to help," Jake said. "Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we found something that changes everything." 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison's crew discovered the ancient war. Earth Command had sent every available ship to the Outer Rim, and now a small human fleet worked alongside alien vessels that looked like they were built by gods. General Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching alien ships move through space in formations that human minds could barely understand. The Kithera moved their crystal ships in perfect mathematical patterns. The Althari vessels flowed like liquid metal. The Zentari ships seemed to be alive, growing and changing shape as they flew. "It's like watching a ballet," said Colonel Beth Murphy, who stood beside him. Beth commanded the human ground forces, and she had been studying alien military tactics for months. "Everything they do is perfect, every move planned down to the smallest detail." Marcus nodded. Maybe that's their problem. The coalition had welcomed the humans with surprise and hope. After 800,000 years of war, any new ally was valuable, even if that ally came from a species that had barely learned to travel between stars. The human fleet was tiny compared to the alien forces. Where the coalition had thousands, Of massive warships, humans had brought 50 ships that the aliens considered primitive. But the alien commanders had learned something interesting about humans during their first joint missions. Humans did not follow the rules. Beth was about to prove this point again. She sat in the briefing room aboard Sanctuary Prime, a space station, the size of a small moon. Around the table sat representatives from a dozen alien species, all planning their next attack against the Vornash. The target was a Vornash intelligence center on a dead planet called Kethmore. The aliens had studied this facility for decades. They knew exactly how many guards it had, what weapons they carried, and how the defense systems worked. "The assault will begin at 800 hours, said Commander Veltar, a Kithra officer whose crystal body sparkled with tactical data. "First, the Althari will disable the outer shield generators using their energy weapons. Then the Zentari will land troops at exactly these coordinates." Veltar showed a holographic map of the facility. Every detail was marked with mathematical precision. "The operation will take 4 hours and 37 minutes. We estimate casualties at 12% of the assault force." The alien officers nodded in agreement. This was how they always planned their missions. Every variable calculated, every risk measured, every outcome predicted. Beth raised her hand. What if something goes wrong? The aliens looked at her with confusion. Veltar's crystal body dimmed slightly. Wrong? All possibilities have been calculated. The plan accounts for every scenario. But what if the enemy does something you don't expect? Beth asked. An Althari commander whose energy body flickered like a living flame spoke up. The Vornash follow predictable patterns. We have fought them for millennia. They do not deviate from their standard responses. Beth smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Then maybe it's time someone did something unpredictable. 2 days later, Beth led a mixed force of human and alien soldiers toward Kethmore. The plan was going exactly as the aliens had predicted. The Althari had disabled the shields. The Zentari had landed their troops. Everything was working perfectly. Then the trap sprang. The intelligence facility was fake. Hidden beneath the planet's surface was a massive Vornash fleet, commanded by one of their top admirals. As soon as the coalition forces landed, enemy ships erupted from underground hangars. "Retreat to secondary positions," ordered Veltar over the communication system. "Initiate Defensive Protocol 7. The alien forces began to pull back in perfect formation, just as their training told them to do. They would regroup, call for reinforcements, and plan a new attack. It was the logical thing to do. Beth had other ideas. "All human units, ignore that order," she said into her radio. "We're going to attack." Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Danny Rodriguez, stared at her in shock. "Colonel, there are 10 times as many enemy ships as we expected. We should retreat." Beth checked her weapon and started running toward the nearest Vornash position. "Danny, in human military history, some of our greatest victories came from doing what the enemy thought was impossible. Follow me." The human soldiers followed their colonel, even though it seemed like suicide. But Beth had studied the Vornash during the past 6 months. They were logical beings who followed patterns. They expected their enemies to be logical, too. The Vornash had planned for a coalition retreat. They had positioned their forces to cut off escape routes and destroy the fleeing alien ships. What they had not planned for was a human charge directly at their strongest positions. Beth's forces hit the Vornash lines like a hammer. They used tactics that the aliens had never seen before. They split into small groups and attacked from different directions. They pretended to retreat and then attacked again. They did things that made no mathematical sense. The confusion spread through the Vornash forces. Their admiral kept sending orders based on logical predictions, but the humans kept doing illogical things. Soon the entire Vornash battle plan fell apart. "Impossible," said the Vornash admiral, whose name was Sovereign Nexus Prime. "They should have retreated. All species retreat when faced with superior numbers. But humans were not like all species." Beth's attack gave the alien coalition forces time to regroup. Soon ships from both sides were fighting throughout the system. But something had changed. For the first time in thousands of years, the Coalition was winning a battle they should have lost. When the fighting ended, the Coalition had captured Sovereign Nexus Prime. It was the first time in 40,000 years that they had taken a high-ranking Vornash officer alive. Dr. Stephen Park, a human psychologist, was given the job of questioning the prisoner. Stephen had studied alien minds for months trying to understand how different species thought. The Vornash admiral was nothing like Stephen had expected. Instead of an evil monster, he found a being who truly believed he was doing the right thing. "You think we are conquerors," Nexus Prime said during one of their sessions. "But we bring peace. We end the chaos that destroys civilizations." Stephen leaned forward in his chair. "By forcing everyone to think the same way?" "Yes," the Admiral replied, without hesitation. "Look at your galaxy. Billions of species, all different, all fighting each other. Wars that last for millennia. Suffering beyond measure. We offer unity. Perfect harmony where no one fights because everyone thinks as one." It was then that Stephen understood the true horror of the Vornash. They were not evil. They were absolutely convinced they were saving the galaxy by destroying everything that made life worth living. Meanwhile, other human officers were making discoveries about their own technology. Captain Elena Rodriguez, who commanded the UES Defiance, had been working with alien engineers to upgrade human computer systems. "The strange thing," Elena told General Webb during a briefing, "is that our computers are actually harder for the aliens to understand than theirs are for us to figure out." Webb raised an eyebrow. "How is that possible? Their technology is thousands of years ahead of ours." Elena pulled up a technical display. "It's because of how we built our systems. Both the Kythera and the Vornash use pure logic in their computers. Everything follows mathematical rules. But human computers use something called quantum uncertainty, random elements that even we can't predict. And that makes them better? It makes them impossible to hack," Elena said with a grin. "The Vornash can break into any Coalition computer system because they all work logically, but human systems are too chaotic for them to understand." This discovery led to the first major Coalition victory in centuries. Using human computer systems to coordinate their forces, a mixed fleet attacked and destroyed a Vornash dreadnought that had terrorized 3 star systems for decades. The ship was called the Eternal Order, and it had never been defeated in battle. Its destruction sent shockwaves through both sides of the war. For the first time in millennia, the impossible had happened. General Webb stood on his bridge, looking at the wreckage of the enemy dreadnought floating in space. Around him, alien officers were celebrating in ways their species had almost forgotten how to do. But Webb was thinking about what came next. The Vornash would adapt to human tactics eventually. They had been fighting this war for 800,000 years. They knew how to learn from defeat. The question was whether humans could stay unpredictable long enough to make a real difference. The war was far from over, but for the first time since it began, the outcome was no longer certain, and sometimes uncertainty was the most powerful weapon of all. 1 year had passed since humans joined the Galactic War. Colonel Sam Mitchell stood on the bridge of his ship, watching a fleet of human and alien vessels prepare for their most dangerous mission yet. The Coalition had been winning battles across the galaxy, but they had just discovered something that changed everything. Deep in Vornash space, near the center of the galaxy, the enemy was building something massive, something that could end the war forever. Captain Danny Rodriguez had found it during a deep space patrol. His scout ship had slipped past enemy defenses and taken pictures of a construction project unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The structure was being built around a group of black holes, using their incredible gravity as a power source. "It's huge," Danny had reported when he returned. "Bigger than a star system. The Vornash have been working on it for thousands of years, and it's almost finished." Dr. Lisa Chen, Earth's best quantum physicist, had studied the images for days. What she discovered made everyone afraid. The machine was designed to capture and process the thoughts of every living being in the galaxy. "They call it the Unity Engine," Lisa explained to the Coalition's War Council. "If they turn it on, It will reach into the mind of every intelligent creature in the galaxy. It will take away their individual thoughts and make them all part of the Vornash Collective. General Patricia Hayes, who now commanded all human forces in the war, understood what this meant. It's not just a weapon, it's the end of free will itself. The alien commanders were terrified. In 800,000 years of war, nothing like this had ever been built. Even the Kithara, with all their mathematical knowledge, could not figure out how to stop it. The Unity engine is protected by defenses that have never been broken, said Commander Veltar. 100 coalition fleets have tried to reach it. All have failed. But Admiral Kevin Murphy, who had replaced General Webb as the human fleet commander, was not ready to give up. Kevin was Beth Murphy's father, and he had learned from his daughter that sometimes the impossible just needed someone willing to try. "We have to attack it," Kevin said. "If we don't, everyone in the galaxy becomes a slave." The other commanders shook their heads. "The defenses are too strong. We would need a miracle." Kevin smiled the same smile his daughter was famous for. "Then we'll make our own miracle." The plan Kevin came up with was simple and completely insane. Instead of trying to fight through the Unity engine's defenses, they would use human sacrifice tactics that other species found impossible to understand. While the main coalition fleet attacked the outer defenses, small groups of human ships would make suicide runs at the machine's core. They would fly directly into the enemy's strongest weapons, hoping that a few ships might get through. "It's not a plan," protested an Althari commander. "It's mass suicide." "Maybe," Kevin replied, "but it's our choice to make. The battle for the Unity engine began 3 days later. The coalition fleet, led by human ships, dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the galactic core. What they saw was like looking at the gates of hell. The Unity engine floated in space like a mechanical god. It was made of materials that bent light around them, powered by forces that could tear apart planets. Around it, thousands of Vornash ships waited in perfect formation. The first wave of attacks went exactly as the aliens had predicted. Coalition ships fired their most powerful weapons at the enemy defenses. The Vornash responded with calculated precision, destroying the attacking ships with mathematical efficiency. But then the human ships began their suicide runs. Commander Julie Parker led the first squadron. She flew her fighter directly at the Unity engine's core, ignoring the weapons fire that destroyed her escort ships one by one. Her radio crackled with her final words. "This is for everyone who wants to keep their own thoughts," she said. And then her ship exploded against the Unity engine's shields. Her sacrifice opened a gap in the defenses for exactly 3 seconds. It was not long enough for the main fleet to get through, but it was long enough for Lieutenant Colonel Alex Turner and his demolition team to slip past in their small transport ship. More human pilots followed Julie's example. Squadron after squadron flew directly into the enemy's guns, each one creating tiny gaps in the defenses. The other coalition species watched in horror and amazement as humans threw their lives away without hesitation. "Why do they do this?" asked a Zentari captain. "They cannot all survive." "They don't expect to," replied Commander Veltar, who was beginning to understand humans better. "They are not fighting to live. They are fighting so that others can live free." Alex Turner's team made it to the Unity engine's core, but what they found there was not what they expected. The machine was not just big, it was alive in a way that no one had imagined. The Unity engine was actually a giant brain, made from the combined consciousness of billions of Vornash. "Dear God," whispered Alex as he looked at the pulsing walls around him. "They didn't build this machine. They became it." Dr. Lisa Chen's voice came through his radio from the command ship. "Alex, the power readings are off the charts. The Unity engine is getting ready to activate. You have maybe 10 minutes before it reaches out and grabs every mind in the galaxy." Alex and his team planted their explosives quickly. They were human bombs, simple and crude compared to the advanced weapons both sides usually used. But Lisa had taught them something important about the Unity engine's design. The machine was powered by a carefully balanced system of artificial black holes. The Vornash had spent thousands of years making sure the energy flow was mathematically perfect, Any disruption to that balance would cause the entire system to fail. Human explosives were not precise. They were chaotic, unpredictable, and messy. When they went off inside the Unity engine's core, they did not destroy the machine cleanly. Instead, they created a cascade of failures that spread through the entire structure. The Unity engine began to tear itself apart. The artificial black holes that powered it started to collapse in ways the Vornash had never considered possible. The machine that was supposed to unite all consciousness instead created a chain reaction that devastated the entire Vornash fleet. From the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Kevin Murphy watched the Unity engine die. The explosion was visible across half the galaxy, a brilliant flash that marked the end of the Vornash's greatest weapon. But the victory came at a terrible price. Half the human fleet had been destroyed in the suicide runs. Thousands of brave men and women had died to give Alex Turner's team their chance. Julie Parker and her pilots would never see their families again. Was it worth it? Asked Commander Veltar as they watched the wreckage spread through space. Kevin looked at the alien officer, thinking about his daughter Beth and all the other humans who had risked everything for people they had never met. Ask me in 100 years when their children are still free to think their own thoughts. The destruction of the Unity engine broke the Vornash in ways that 800,000 years of war had not. For the first time in millennia, their perfect collective consciousness began to crack. Individual Vornash across the galaxy started to experience something they had not felt in millions of years. Doubt. Some began to question whether unity was really better than freedom. Others wondered if the war they had fought for so long was actually worth winning. The hegemony that had seemed unbreakable was starting to fall apart from within. But the war was not over yet. The remaining Vornash forces regrouped around their homeworld, preparing for one final battle. They knew that if they lost, their entire civilization would collapse into chaos. The coalition forces, led by human commanders who had learned to think like their enemies, prepared for the last campaign. They had broken the Vornash superweapon, but now they faced an enemy that had nothing left to lose. Kevin Murphy looked at the star charts showing the enemy's position. The final battle would be the biggest in galactic history. Everything that had happened in the past year had led to this moment. The humans had proven that sometimes the smallest force could change the course of the largest war. Now they would find out if courage and chaos could defeat an empire that had ruled for millions of years. 2 years after humans had entered the Galactic War, everything had changed. Supreme Commander Rachel Morris stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship, watching thousands of ships prepare for the final battle. She was the first human to command the entire Coalition fleet, and the weight of that responsibility felt heavier than a planet. The war that had lasted 800,000 years was about to end. But nobody knew if it would end in victory or disaster. "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission from Vornash space," reported Lieutenant Tony Reed from the communication station. "It's not from their military command. The signal is coming from one of their colony worlds." Rachel frowned. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and an image appeared that shocked everyone on the bridge. It was a Vornash, but unlike any they had seen before. Instead of the cold, emotionless expression that all Vornash shared, this one looked afraid and confused. "Coalition forces," the alien said in broken English. "We need help. We have broken free from the collective, but the hegemony is sending ships to destroy us. We choose chaos over order. We choose freedom over unity." Rachel felt her heart skip a beat. "What's your name?" The Vornash paused, as if trying to remember how to think of itself as an individual. I choose to be called Chaos Singer. It is the first name I have chosen for myself in 3 million years." Dr. Nancy Clark, the fleet's specialist in alien psychology, stepped forward. "This is incredible, Commander. We're watching the birth of individual consciousness in a species that abandoned it millions of years ago." Over the next few hours, more signals came in from across Vornash space. Entire colonies were breaking away from the collective, their people experiencing individual thoughts for the first time in their species' recorded history. The consciousness virus that had started with humans was spreading faster than anyone had imagined. But the remaining Vornash leadership was not going to let their empire fall apart without a fight. The Prime Nexus, the central mind that controlled the hegemony, had pulled all its loyal forces back to the capital world. They were preparing to destroy every rebel colony and then launch one final attack on Coalition space. "We have to reach them before the Prime Nexus destroys them all," Rachel told her officers. "These rebels are proof that the Vornash can change. We can't let them be wiped out." General Mike Anderson, who commanded the Coalition ground forces, studied the tactical displays. "The capital system is the most heavily defended place in the galaxy. We'll be fighting through defenses that have been built up over millions of years." Rachel nodded. "Then we better bring everything we have." The final fleet was the largest force ever assembled in galactic history. Human ships flew alongside ancient Kithara vessels and living Zentari craft. Former enemies worked together, united by the simple idea that beings should be free to think their own thoughts. Captain Tony Reed commanded one of the scout ships that would go in first. His job was to find safe paths through the enemy's defensive fields. But when his ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Vornash space, he found something unexpected. "Commander Morris," he reported over the radio, "you need to see this." The main Coalition fleet arrived to find Vornash ships fighting each other. The rebels had formed their own fleet and were attacking the Prime Nexus forces. Individual Vornash commanders were learning to make their own tactical decisions, and they were using the chaos and unpredictability they had learned from watching humans fight. "It's a civil war," said Commander Veltar, whose crystal body was flashing with amazement. "In 800,000 years of galactic conflict, we never imagined this could happen." The battle for the Vornash capital became 3 separate fights happening at the same time. Coalition forces attacked the Prime Nexus defenses from one direction. Rebel Vornash ships struck from another angle. And in the middle of it all, the Prime Nexus itself was fighting a battle inside its own mind. Dr. Nancy Clark monitored the strange psychic energies coming from the capital world. "The Prime Nexus is fragmenting," she reported. "Individual personalities are breaking away from the collective consciousness. It's like watching a single mind split into millions of separate thoughts." The most important battle was happening on the surface of the capital world itself. General Anderson led a mixed force of humans and aliens down to the planet, where they had to fight through cities that had been designed by a collective mind that thought in perfect mathematical harmony. But the rebels were fighting too. Former Vornash soldiers who had chosen individual names for themselves battled alongside Coalition forces. They moved in ways that their former comrades could not predict, because they were learning to think like individuals instead of parts of a group mind. The fighting reached the heart of the capital city, where the Prime Nexus had its physical form. The central consciousness existed in a massive structure that looked like a combination of a computer and a living brain. For millions of years, it had been the single mind that guided the entire Vornash species. Now it was dying. "I can hear it screaming," said Chaos Singer, who had joined the assault force. "The Prime Nexus is experiencing individual thought for the first time, and it doesn't know how to handle the chaos." General Anderson and his troops fought their way to the central chamber, where they found something that would have been impossible to imagine when the war began. The Prime Nexus was not trying to destroy them. Instead, it was asking for help. The ancient collective mind spoke with 1,000 voices, each one representing a different personality that was breaking away from the group consciousness. "What have you done to us?" it asked. "We were one. We were perfect. Now we are many and we are afraid." Anderson looked at the alien intelligence that had ruled half the galaxy for millions of years. "You're becoming individuals," he said. "It's scary at first, but it's also wonderful. You get to choose who you want to be." "But what if we choose wrong?" the Prime Nexus asked. Anderson smiled. "Then you get to choose again. That's what freedom means." The war ended, not with a great explosion or a final battle, but with a choice. The Prime Nexus, faced with the terrifying and wonderful experience of individual thought, chose to let its people decide their own fate. Across the galaxy, Vornash colonies declared their independence from the collective and began the difficult process of learning how to be individuals. The transformation was not easy. Some Vornash could not handle the change and asked to be reconnected to a smaller collective mind. Others embraced their new freedom so completely that they seemed to become entirely different beings. But for the first time in millions of years, they had the choice. Rachel Morris stood in the assembly hall of the new galactic government, watching representatives from hundreds of species work together to write the Constitution of the Free Worlds Alliance. Humans sat next to ancient Kithara. Former Vornash colonies sent ambassadors who were still learning how to speak as individuals. "How did we do it?" asked Admiral Laura White, who had become humanity's chief representative to the Alliance. How did a species that barely knew how to build spaceships end an 800,000-year war? Rachel thought about Jake Morrison, who had answered that first distress signal. She thought about Beth Murphy charging into impossible odds. She remembered Julie Parker and all the other pilots who had sacrificed their lives to destroy the Unity engine. "We didn't end the war by being stronger or smarter than everyone else," Rachel said. "We ended it by refusing to accept that some problems can't be solved." Every other species in the galaxy had gotten used to the idea that the war would go on forever. But humans don't know how to give up. 50 years later, the galaxy was a very different place. Former Vornash worlds had become centers of art and philosophy as their people explored what it meant to be individuals. The Kithara learned to balance their mathematical precision with human-inspired creativity. And humanity, once confined to a small corner of space, helped guide a galactic civilization built on the idea that differences make everyone stronger. The Great War was remembered not as humanity's victory, but as proof that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is simply refusing to believe that anything is impossible. The war that had lasted 800,000 years ended because humans brought something that had been missing from the galaxy for too long: hope.